Welcome to the North Shore Performance Podcast, where we take a deep dive into health and fitness for everyday people and the athlete in all of us. I am your host, Jake Wirtz, and with me is my best friend and co-host, Tanner Schenkel. Together, we take an honest look at fitness and discuss how anybody can improve their lives by adopting a healthy lifestyle. Welcome back to another episode of the North Shore Performance Podcast. Today, our topic, we're going to be starting a weight loss series. So we're going to be actually talking about different things regarding losing weight and different strategies, tips, some of the basics that you need to know in order to lose weight. That's a common New Year's resolution. It's a common goal that everybody has this time of year. So we're really going to dive into it. This first episode, we're going to be talking about energy, calories, energy balance. Like, what does that all mean? But it really is the foundation for any good weight loss program.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you hear the word calorie, I mean, I think most people kind of think of what's back in the back of like a nutrition label. What does calorie mean to you when you think about it?
To me?
Yeah.
Growing up, I don't know, calories were like bad, if that makes sense. Like, I know they're not, but when you were first taking health class and stuff like that, and they try to explain like what we're going to talk about today, I feel like the takeaway when you're a kid, when you don't understand things as well, it's like you look at calories as maybe they're a bad thing. So like, oh, I'm just always going to go for like the low calorie food because that's the healthier option. It's like, well, that's not necessarily true, as we know. There are plenty of low calorie free foods, low calorie foods that are not what we would call healthy or nutritionally dense or anything like that, or even satiating. You know what I mean?
Exactly. You're gonna burn through them pretty quick, and you're gonna keep eating more. So then you're going to eat more calories than if you eat something probably more satiating or wholesome. So Webster's dictionary has calorie essentially as a scientific definition, a unit of heat used to indicate the amount of energy foods produce in the human body that is equal to 1,000 calories. So essentially, it's the unit of energy we use in our body is a calorie. So like Wirtz brought up a good point, like the calories are kind of demonized. And especially when you're having an athlete or someone that's trying to train or just get stronger, like we need energy to build muscle. Like that is plain and simple. So you need calories. So they're not some demonized thing. Yes, they are a tool. You should limit calories to an extent, in which we'll go over today, to lose weight and hit your weight loss goals, but they're not this scary monster that it seems like sometimes in the health industry people put it as. So
yeah, that's a good point. I really like what you said there about like calorie isn't evil. At the end of the day, like the most simplest way to understand or to recognize what a calorie is, it's just a unit of measurement. It's just a unit of measurement when it comes to energy. You know what I mean? It's just like any other unit of measurement. I always love the gurus or the nutritional zeals that are like, oh, a calorie is not a calorie, or like all calories are not equal. And it's like, that's kind of true when you start to look at like the micronutrient profile and some of the other aspects of food, like minerals, vitamins, stuff like that. But a calorie is a calorie at the end of the day, because that's all. It's just a unit of measurement. It's not a sentient thing. It's not like a conscious good or evil thing. It's just a unit of measurement. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's some people do that. Like me and Wirtz, for the most part, when we diet, or even when we bulk or whatnot, we kind of live in the idea that's calories in, calories out. So essentially, like how much we're consuming, how much we burn off in the day, and depending on what our goals are, what we have either left over or what we have in deficit, that is how we attain our goals. Which it can be too simplistic, but for the most part, that is how you lose weight. If your body is in a deficit, it's going to burn stored fat and you lose weight. If your body is in surplus.
What does that mean for our listeners? Can you explain a deficit?
So essentially, what we're going into the next thing is the total energy expenditure. So how much energy you burn in a day. Now that's with exercise that we found out is called EAT as an acronym.
Exercise, activity, thermogenesis.
There it is. We didn't believe that was true. We came up with it on our own. We're like, that can't be right.
That doesn't sound right. It's too simple.
And then there's things like doing your chores, doing grocery shopping, stuff like that. That is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So that would be neat for you acronym lovers out there. Then you have your basal metabolic rate. So that essentially is how many calories it takes to survive. If you just laid in your bed all day, did absolutely nothing. And I always, when I think of that, I think of that SpongeBob episode when he's doing photosynthesis and he's just laying there going like this. Like
Photosynthesis.
you would be moving too much for that just to be basal metabolic rate. But essentially, you're laying there like a slug, not doing anything. That's your basal metabolic rate.
It's literally the bare minimum to keep the lights on.
Yep.
Like that's what your organs need to function. Actually, do you know what organ produces or uses the most energy?
I feel like it's your digestive system, your stomach.
I think it's your brain. I'm pretty sure it's your brain.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Because maybe not yours, but it takes a lot of glycogen and a lot of glucose. Like that's a preferred energy source for your brain, but that's getting into the weeds there. But they measure basal metabolic rate too in like a metabolic chamber. So they literally have these guys when they do these studies. They have these guys go into a metabolic chamber and they just sit there or they lay there for like an hour, do nothing. They try to keep their breathing as still as possible. They don't even speak. And they measure how many calories their body burned. That's what this metabolic chamber does. It measures the amount of energy that they burn. And they extrapolate that over a 24-hour period. So even that is a rough estimate because most of the time they're not keeping people in a metabolic chamber for long periods of time. Maybe 3 or 4 hours, and then they'll extrapolate it from there. But they're not sticking people in there for weeks at a time because that's not really functional. But
exactly. And so when we talk about the TDEE or total daily energy expenditure, it's important to understand it's when you do certain calculations, like we'll bring up a website, it's an estimation. You have to run the scientific test to see exactly what it is, but that can fluctuate based on, say you ran for a mile today and now tomorrow you just lift weights. Well, depending on your energy level, your TDE is going to be different. So it's important to understand that it's just an estimation, and you want to kind of you don't need to be exact, but like keep it within a certain range when you're looking at it. So when you look at on your TDEE, you could either be eating. So essentially, that's how many calories we want to consume. That would be our maintenance level. Say for easy math, we burn 2,000 calories. That's a crazy amount. That's pretty high, but that's just for easy math. That was the first number that came to my head. And then you have your surplus. Anything you eat over that, that's your surplus. And then anything under that you eat the day you consume, you take in under your TDE is going to be a deficit. And then if you keep at that 2,000, that's your maintenance level. So that'd be to hopefully keep the same exact weight that you currently have. Now, as a surplus, you add weight. So if you're bulking or whatnot, or you just need to add weight to be healthier if you're below a certain weight range. And then deficit, obviously, to lose weight. So,
and that's a surplus or a deficit over a long period of time. It's not like an acute thing. It's not like you can go and slash your calories one day, and let's say you only eat breakfast and you're stuck at 500 calories. Oh, I'm in a 1,500 calorie surplus. Well, I mean, you might drop a little weight between that and the next day, but you're going to be awfully hungry and you're probably going to overeat the next day. So it's kind of a wash. So when you look at a surplus or a deficit, we're going to focus on losing weight. So we're mostly going to be talking about a deficit. It's really a long-term deficit. So like a lot of times people will take a rolling average of their week and they'll estimate how many calories they burn a day. They take that average, move it out over 7 days. And then you're just trying to be at a deficit for the week. And then you stack enough of those weeks up on top of each other. And then you have weight loss, sustainable weight loss. Or weight gain if you're trying to go the other way, you go into a surplus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that, using that rolling average.
So when you're looking at your total daily expenditure, it is, like we said, it's an estimate. It's not like a tried and true, this is exactly how many calories I burn a day. That's a mistake some people make. They live and they die by the estimate. But what kind of things go into that estimate? It's more of a lifestyle thing, right?
Yeah, so it's going to ask you how many times you work out a week, what kind of job you have, like if it's like a landscaping job versus you sit at a desk and you have a more stationary job.
A sedentary lifestyle. Yeah.
Is going to be big things like that. and it's going to ask like for your workouts how strenuous I can't, whatever, how hard they are. If you're doing a lot of like high cardiovascular exertion where you're burning a lot more calories than say you're lifting, stuff like that, or just in general more intensity level. It also asks like your fat percentage. Some people won't know what that is unless you've recently got a scan, caliper test, or you have a fancy scale like we do. Again, those are all estimations. I mean, you could have a bunch of different versions of a body fat test, and they could all tell you different things. So estimation is a big thing to understand, but that just helps you have more an accurate representation in your TDE calculation.
Your age and body weight can be a big component of that as well. Yep. Obviously, the younger you are, typically the higher your energy expenditure is going to be. As you get older, your metabolism starts to slow down a little bit. And then also the heavier you are, this isn't a verbatim. So this isn't a hard and fast rule, but typically a person who is larger will burn more calories than someone who is smaller, just because they have more body to maintain. Not necessarily just muscle mass, although muscle mass does burn extra calories. So there is that. But, you know, the larger the person, typically the estimate will skew that they burn a few more calories, because everything they do takes more energy. Even walking to the car, getting up and down out of the couch, or, you know, off the couch or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's a good point to bring up, because you're like, oh, my TDEE is pretty good, but you might be more on the heavier side, which we got to work on. And that's our goal, this to give you some information, help with that. It might not be actually a healthy TDEE based on what you do in a day. Like if you burn a lot, but you really don't exercise, that could be a telltale sign that it might be something to work on. So, so let's take an example here. I can pop up a good website that I use and a lot of people in the field use to kind of figure out what that is. So,
do me.
All right, we're going to do words here. So this website is, and I'll put it in the show notes here, just tdecalculator.net. Pretty straightforward. Probably one of my, from all the ones I've seen.
And this is not the only one. There are several other calculators.
But this one, I like it that there's no like advertisements popping up on it. I like it how it's not trying to sell me something. Like
it's more scientifically based.
Yeah, so I like that. So we'll keep it in imperial because we're a bunch of Americans.
We ain't no commies.
So we'll put words. He's 26. What is your current weight?
Right now I'm about 205.
205. And your height?
5'8". I'm a short boy.
And what would you say? Can you see the screen?
I'm probably somewhere between moderate exercise and heavy exercise. I do train about 5 days a week in my job. I'm up on my feet. I work retail, you know, unload trucks, things like that. So I am on my feet a lot. So you might be able to say heavy exercise, but let's actually go with the lower estimate just to be conservative. That's what I usually tend to do. I think my body fat is somewhere probably around 18 and a, 18 and a half maybe. So just 18.
You hit calculate. All right. I like this too, that it does break it down by week. Like
just like we talked about, it's a rolling average of your week.
And it will tell you too on the side here, your basal metabolic rate. If you have more of a sedentary lifestyle, so say something changes, you break your leg, can't work out for a couple months. Well, it gives you an idea what your TDEE, which is kind of helpful. So his TDEE would be 3,126. That's his maintenance calories. You can see in the top here. So that would be to keep his current body weight and fat percentage. That would be what he's looking at.
Yeah, I do really like this website. I've used this one quite a bit myself too. I do really like how it shows you at each stage of activity how many calories your estimate is. So like let's say I am being conservative in my estimate, because there are times I probably do fall under the heavy exercise category. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But let's say I'm being conservative and I'm going to say, well, there are some weeks where maybe I take a day off, or, you know, maybe I'm up in the office a little bit more. Maybe I'm not on my feet as much. So but yeah, and then I also like this where it says your ideal weight, 148 to 153. Can we talk about that for just a second?
That's a joke. I mean,
that is ridiculous. That shouldn't even be there. I hate that so much. So it's basically saying I have to lose 50 pounds to be considered ideal. You know how much, oh my God, I would just be,
It'd be
I would
wasting
be,
away.
exactly. I wouldn't look, I don't think I would look very good at all. So
I think it's interesting to take into, like, for example, my 15-year-old nephew who plays basketball and is still going through puberty is heavier than that recommendation. So, and he's 1 inch taller than words. So that just doesn't make sense, in my opinion. But I think it's interesting how you put moderate exercise. So, like, based on that, you could assume that you exercise in some capacity, either weightlifting or whatnot. So you'd assume they have more muscle mass, but that is the ideal weight that comes up, even though based on,
that's absurd.
yeah, just based
That
on their activity level that
I'm going to go on a rant here for a second because you look at the BMI score too, and it says 31.2. Your BMI is 31.2, which means you're classified as obese. Okay. Let's say I am obese. That's fine. I guess categorically I would be based off of this. But the BMI scale and the ideal weight, all that does is take in account your height. It doesn't really take into account, like, it asks me my body fat percentage, but I don't, like, your body fat percentage isn't really referenced anywhere in this. You know what I mean? It doesn't take into account like your skeletal structure. Like if you're wider, if you have wider shoulders, I'm shorter, but I do have wider shoulders than a normal person my height. So I naturally carry more weight. And obviously I've been training for years, so I do have a little more muscle mass than the average person. So the BMI scale doesn't really take any of that into account. My favorite example of all time is peak Adrian Peterson. He's 6'1", 225 pounds. You looked at that dude without a shirt on, and he doesn't have a drop of fat on him. He's one of the most jacked athletes of his generation, just a freak. And the BMI scale says he's morbidly obese because he's 6'1", 225. And it's like, are you kidding me? This is a joke. Rant over, but I don't want people to look at that BMI score for themselves and like feel that necessarily means like they're over, like they're fat or I don't know what I'm trying to say, but don't really take that to heart. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a skewed scale. The military uses it, and there are a couple other aspects where people use that, but it's just another way for them to categorize data.
Yep. BMI is a good starting point. Like, say you have someone that has no exercise experience or whatnot.
Sure.
Then
for the average population, it probably isn't so bad.
Yep. But for someone who's an athlete and trains and stuff like that, it's gonna sway to the side that you might feel that you're obese or whatnot. But that's because you have more muscle mass. It doesn't take into consideration the difference between body fat, how much muscle mass you have, all that kind of stuff. It's just your height and weight that are consideration. Kind of cool thing too, looking down here.
The macro split.
It does, which is our next episode, is breaking down macros, explain what they are, what they're used for, stuff like that. But it has some different options, which I thought was kind of cool. And I do like the protein. We'll get into this more next episode, but stereotypically, usually these are very low on the protein side, but this actually has some appropriate protein from our beliefs. Again, we are not licensed dietitians, nutritionists, anything like that. This is just stuff that we have found based on our research, our experience, that have helped us a lot. Eventually in my career, hopefully we get to that point. But as of right now, please understand that we are not licensed dietitians, nutritionists.
Yes. Thank you for covering our butt.
But also too, it talks about, like what we just talked about previously, the maintenance.
Those are your macros if you're on a maintenance.
Yep.
And there's your cutting. Yep.
But it also up here has the calories that they recommend.
Even
so this one's a pretty steep deficit, 500 calorie deficit.
Yeah.
But then it also does bulking, which is kind of cool. So this is kind of a website just to kind of play with and kind of different scenarios. Offers some different good tracking tools, food scales, bathroom scale. Obviously, MyFitnessPal is an app that we've all used ourselves.
All of those are very useful tools, by the way.
Yeah,
but they're not essential. You don't have to use any of those things, but they do help.
Yeah, they help it along. That could be something. One of the episodes we do too is talking about like healthy or helpful tips or tools that you may,
or maybe a healthy approach to weight loss.
Stuff like that.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So that's kind of this website. Again, it's TDEcalculator.net.
Leave that screen up for a bit.
Yeah. Pretty straightforward.
One thing I like to do too sometimes, because I always, whenever I do this, I'm always like, that seems like an awful lot of calories. I'm like, I feel like if I eat 3,000 calories, I'm going to be just shoveling food. Because usually when you're tracking, any behavior that's observed naturally changes, right?
Yep.
So if you're tracking, even if you're like, I'm going to keep everything exactly the same as, what I normally eat, because you just want to know. Well, if you're tracking, you're probably naturally going to make choices that are a little healthier. I find that eating that many calories a day for me personally, when I'm tracking and eating clean foods, what I consider clean, whole foods, essentially, it's really hard to hit that number. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like
exactly.
the only time I hit that number and go like way over is when I start introducing like a lot of processed food, a pizza here and there, some ice cream or, some chips or, I'm a big sweets guy. So any sweets come into the house, that's a dangerous situation for me. So, but I always think that's kind of interesting. But one thing I like to do, I'll actually use a couple different total daily expenditure calculators. And sometimes I'll just average them out, you know, because if I have like five different, they all essentially use similar formulas, but they're a little different. But if I use two or three and they're spitting out similar numbers, then I can feel like at least that's a reasonable ballpark. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, especially with it being an estimation. Like this is not exact science by any means.
No.
Um,
And
so
there are
I
going to
think
be
that's a good
days you're
point.
above that and below that for your
Yeah,
expenditure. It's all based
exactly.
on your daily activity.
And that's something to bring up. I don't think we've talked about yet. But say you're doing this for a couple weeks and you're not seeing the results that you're looking for. That's something you got to tweak it a little bit and kind of play with it
Yeah.
to show for to see progress. If you're trying to lose weight and your deficit calorie goal, you're not losing weight, you got to adjust a little more. Because again, it is estimation and it's going to go up or down based on your activity level and just what you do in a day. Say it's come spring, people usually become more active, start going for more walks, stuff like that.
Yep.
Your TDE is going
Especially
to
here
go
up
up.
in Minnesota.
Oh yeah, the first time we had a cold front and haven't been able to walk my dogs in like a week and a half because it's been below zero.
It's
16
freaking
degrees
cold
felt
here,
like
man.
45. It's almost pull up the short weather.
Yeah, I think it was 25 degrees here today, and I was like, ooh, gonna get the flip flops out.
Yeah, feel the taste of spring. You're like, oh,
No, I do love this website though. I really think this is a useful tool.
mm-hmm.
How so we've talked about a daily expenditure estimate. And so let's say, yeah, your client or you're making recommendations to someone. Let's say their total daily expenditure is about 3,000 calories. How aggressive of a surplus or a deficit are you usually suggesting? Like, are you cutting that down to 2,000? Are you going sub 2,000? Or what are your general recommendations? Because we haven't touched on that either.
Yeah, I mean, so that's going to be tough. Legally, they're not recommendations; they're just based on what we can do from our experience. Uh, I heard Dave Tate say that in one of his podcasts today. I thought that was pretty funny.
He's a
Um,
smart guy.
is very smart. But anyways, I think it depends on how drastic their goals are. Like, say they have a time frame to reach by. Um, their experience in dieting. If this is their first attempt to diet, maybe start a little more on the conservative side, kind of like cold turkey, or how they feel about their goals. Like maybe they're a person that knows they need to go cold turkey, then you can get a little more aggressive. But I think those were the individual coming to you, what their goals are, what's their time frame, I think needs to be taken consideration to answer that question. I would say ideally you're 250, 300 to start off with below in a deficit. But I think it kind of depends. If it's someone who wants to try intermittent fasting, it might be easier you'd be more in 500-600 probably just because you're skipping a whole meal. But it's kind of taking just consideration what they're willing to try in time frame.
Because you made a comment when you scrolled down and it said if you were in a deficit of about 500 calories, you even said like, oh, that's a steep deficit. And I agree with you. I think that is pretty steep if you're starting out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it all depends on your experience level, how many times you've tried to lose weight, things like that. Obviously, we've all tried to lose weight. But
yeah, because with you, I mean, that would be 2,600 calories. I mean, that would be a little hard.
that's
Based
about
because
what
I
I'm
know you're
eating now.
training. Yeah. Okay. For me,
And
I feel like that would be a little hard.
I'm somewhere between 25 and 27 most days. And that
Yeah.
fluctuates too. Some days I'm just not as hungry. And then
Yep.
there's days like today, as soon as we get off the Zoom, I'm going to go crush some food. I'm ravenously hungry right now, but I'm choosing to be here with you and the people because that's how much I love you. But yeah, a 500 calorie deficit for someone that's just starting out, that's really aggressive.
Mm-hmm. But someone who has experience doing it, that's, I mean, like bodybuilders and stuff like that, they probably easily go into that right away. That's just what they're used to.
And they know their bodies a little bit better too, so it's more fine tuned.
Exactly.
You know, we're more geared towards people that are entry level beginners, people that are just trying to learn the basics of this kind of thing. And even some of this stuff isn't entirely necessary for weight loss, but it all is all useful tools. I think it's really important to figure out roughly where you are as far as what your cap is for the amount of calories you can eat, and then just start from there. You know,
Yeah.
I think even Dave Tate makes a recommendation. You know, he'll figure out what their estimate is for their daily expenditure, and he'll say just eat that, right? Eat that for a week, and then literally just cut a little bit out. Don't even go nuts. Just start at your deficit or your maintenance. Try to maintain weight for a week, and then literally just cut like 100 calories, or like another 50 calories, another 50 calories until you start to like hit that point where the scale tips a little bit. Now the problem with that is sometimes it's not practical because people are very impatient. I am like this. A gradual cut for me is always very, very hard because you're trying to hang on to that lean muscle mass. But you know, when the scale doesn't budge after a week, or if you're in a bad habit of weighing yourself every single day, then you might be a little more aggressive. And then that's where those 500 calorie cuts come in. You know what I mean?
Yep, exactly. I think Mind Pump does something similarly where they start more of a, they slowly knock down the calories, especially for a beginner. But then like the whole tracking, because tracking can get hard, like tracking food and whatnot. Necessarily you don't need to do it, but it is definitely helpful. But starting small can definitely be an easier way to do it if you're, unless you're drastically like, I'm going to eat a salad today. Well, that might total 500 calories. So at lunchtime or dinner time, you might be ravenous and you might forget to track. So if you start slower, it becomes easier to create the good habits that you're trying to create.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts about how much weight somebody should try to lose? Can like how much weight per week? I know there's the general recommendations. We're probably thinking along the same lines, but I'm just curious what your take is on it. When you try to lose weight, what is like a goal that you usually go for in a week if things are trending the right way?
In a week, I probably shoot for, if I'm going drastic, probably 1.5 pounds. If I'm going slower, 1.5 pounds to a pound. Right now, that's what I'm going for, 1.5 pounds to a pound. I'm trying to cut some weight to get to that 220 marker for the new weight classes and whatnot, and just be more mobile. So, but I also don't want to lose a lot of muscle, which I feel like I've lost a lot of strength, but also there's other reasons my training hasn't been that way. So, but I think it just depends. Again, that's going to go into their goals. Like, how drastically do they want, like, say they're trying to lose for their wedding, they're trying to lose weight for their weddings in 2 months, maybe we take more of a drastic approach. So it all depends on the person you're talking to. But I would say that kind of sweet spot, 0.5 pound to 1.5 pounds, is probably a good healthy marker. Unless you're someone who's on the larger scale, then you're gonna,
if you're very
lose weight
overweight,
faster.
sometimes there's a point where the scale doesn't really apply to you as much.
Exactly. So
I think
it's going to be situational based, but that's kind of my train of thought.
absolutely. I think the general like scientific like recommendation for somebody who is not super overweight to the point where they just need to lose weight to obviously immediately improve their health, but for somebody who's not in that category, usually it's like 1% of your body weight a week is like the rough like guideline, right? So for someone who, 1% to 0.5% of your body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, 1% would be 2 pounds. And then if you're trying to be more conservative, like most dietitians would probably recommend, because then you would hang on to more lean muscle mass, obviously. That's only a 0.5 pound or 1 pound, sorry. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot of weight. And when you have a lot of weight to lose, it can be really frustrating to go, man, I'm only going to lose 1 pound a week. Like, forget this. I don't want to do that. That's a waste of time. But it's a long game. You know what I mean? If you lost 1 pound a week and you did that for 15 weeks, you just lost 15 pounds. And that doesn't sound that impressive, but like you've probably held on to a lot of muscle in that time too, because you did it slow and controlled. Well, how much better are you going to look if you lose 15 pounds of fat and just fat or mostly fat? You're going to look a lot better. I mean, that's another thing too. I'm just so impatient that I have a hard time with that. So I have to be really dialed in. Otherwise I just crash diet, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, it just you gotta take it slow. It's gonna be a process. It's a marathon, not a race. So
What are your thoughts on tracking? Like, what are some things that you found helpful? What are some things that maybe some mistakes you've made? And then what kind of tracker are you using now?
as of right now, I'm not like hardcore tracking. I'm tracking to kind of figure out, like today I just meal prepped. I bought those big things of chicken thighs from Costco. I bought a big thing of frozen green beans and essentially cooked it up. I went on, I'm using the Carbon app by Lane Norton for my tracking. I typed in what a serving of baked chicken thighs are, ended up being like 4 ounces. Decided to round up to 5 ounces just to make it easier and get a little more protein in. I threw that in a plastic baggie with a serving of green beans. And then some of my meals I'll have with rice, some of them I won't. But I have an idea and understanding what that looks like calories wise and how much protein I'm getting, because it's pretty much the same meal every time. I have some kind of lean protein, a vegetable, a yogurt, oikos, or some kind of high protein yogurt. And depending if that's my lunch that day or my second lunch, I'll have a protein shake with it. So I pretty much have the same thing. So I'm not tracking hardcore right now, because I'm eating like a dog. That whole meme, like you have to, in order to lose weight, you got to eat like a dog. They eat the same thing every day. I mean, that's essentially what I'm doing. So I have an idea. If I'm doing something different or new, that's when I'm putting it into the app to give myself a general idea of what I'm consuming based on calories, protein consumption, that kind of stuff. So I'm trying a different meal prep out, eating something different. But yeah, I mean, my whole mindset is I try to save 800 to maybe 1,000 calories for dinner and like snacks afterwards. Cause my wife she eats healthy, don't get me wrong, but she doesn't eat boring like I do, like chicken, rice, and broccoli.
She's not obsessed with those little minute details like you and I are. Exactly. My wife's the same way. Yeah.
So I still want to eat healthy and enjoy dinner with my wife. So I leave myself some room to, if we're gonna have spaghetti one night or like a pizza or something like that, there's room in my diet plan for that, which is kind of more of based on experience. You can kind of learn how to do that. Wouldn't recommend that for a beginner. But then there's that. And then like my snacks at late at night, I was bad for a while when I was bulking. I was eating cookie dough a lot. But now my snacks are like,
hey, those eggs, that's protein, baby.
Yeah,
that's protein.
But I got like this pretty low caloric popcorn. It's like 140 calories for 3 cups. So that fills you up. I'll eat like raspberries, we'll eat yogurts, stuff like that. Just stuff to help with the sweet tooth, but they're less caloric dense. So then that's kind of my snacks at night. And then I usually go to bed, I'll drink a protein shake, just get some protein in me so I'm not going catabolic while I sleep. But when you're cutting, that really doesn't matter. But I just like to have something in my stomach when I go to bed. Otherwise, I wake up starving and I eat everything in sight. So,
yeah, no, I like what you said there too. It sounds like you're taking kind of what they call a flexible dieting approach. And I think we should do an episode on different like approaches to diets, like as far as like the actual quote unquote diet, because there's all sorts of different ones. There's keto, there's carnivore, there's paleo, there's the flexible diet, which I think you and I both tend to skew that way most of the time. Like you just made fun of yourself because you eat the same thing every day, but you don't. You have different dinners. You have dinners with your wife and things like that. And I try to do the same thing because she doesn't want to eat the way that I want to eat, obviously, because I'm a psychopath and I eat ground beef and rice every day for lunch because that's the perfect macronutrient split. But that all aside, that's kind of the way I like to approach it too, the flexible dieting side of it. Just tracking is really useful, but I think it's important too for people to eventually get to a point where they don't need to track in order to feel comfortable with the way they're eating, to eat quote unquote healthy. You know what I mean? it can become kind of dogmatic and detrimental to your mental health and your relationship with food if all you're doing is tracking all the time. I think it's important to track for a while to kind of figure out where you're at. And then as you're trying to make adjustments, especially while you're new, I think it's important to track too, to see if you're actually making significant changes and if you're making progress. But once you kind of figure those things out and you know how your body responds to certain foods and certain eating patterns and different meals and things like that, I think it's a good idea to try to put that away, so to speak, and not be so anal about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. Camber, it was a couple episodes ago. I'm a little behind on Dave Tate's Table Talk, but he had a guy that does like nutrition and stuff for bodybuilders, and he brought it up the point where every say you look at a back of nutrition label, and it's like, oh, 4 ounces of chicken breast is 4 grams of fat. Well, that's not necessarily true. That's just the average chicken breast at that weight is going to be 4 grams of fat. So like when you're measuring and you're tracking, that's what you're typing in is the average of that, which truly it might not be exactly that, but it's getting you close to your goal. And that's what tracking, it gives you a good idea, and you're thinking about what you're eating more when you're tracking versus you're like, oh, this is probably roughly this, you throw it together, whatever. I mean, it might not, you might be wrong. But that's what that tracking does. It's important to give you that understanding what you're actually consuming, and it makes you more thoughtful when you're actually eating. And that's kind of the idea of this whole thing, is being more thoughtful eaters versus just eat whatever sounds good. And maybe just, I think what's a food intelligence, I think I heard someone say that, like what we're actually consuming and thinking about that is called food intelligence. And that's going to be an important concept, I think, going into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really like what you said there about how like labels and like anything that you track, it's mostly an average. You know what I mean? Because every cow doesn't have the exact same like body fat as opposed to the cow next to it, or the chicken next to it. You know what I mean? So that is a good point to bring up. It is more so of an educated guess, and your total daily expenditure, that's an estimate. Your BMR, unless you go to a metabolic chamber, that's an estimate. So all these things are just estimates, but they are trying to help simplify things and kind of guide you towards whatever goal you're going for. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's what this is. It's kind of like your own science experiment. What you're eating, like say eating a certain amount of servings of rice, you feel bloated, you feel gross. That's this whole thing is you need to adjust to how you feel afterwards you eat. And maybe you just feel like you're dragging after a certain amount of calories. Like today the theme is calories. So say you go aggressive, you're at a 500 deficit. You're just dragging at 2:00 and you're exhausted. You just need more energy. Maybe that's something to take into consideration, and maybe don't drastic it's cut. You need to kind of take consideration what you feel and how you feel afterwards you eat. Those are going to be the big things for you to be successful, because if you feel like shit, you're not going to want to do it.
Yeah, I think the phrase is intuitive eating.
Yep.
That is essentially what you're striving for. Obviously, you start by tracking and kind of seeing where you're at. You slowly kind of salt that away, but you eventually want to get to a point where you can kind of intuitively eat. And what that means is you eat what you want, and you base how you feel. You take how you feel and you base your decision off of how you feel, as opposed to like you just eat everything in sight, or you're mindlessly eating while you watch TV. You know how that food's going to make you feel, so you kind of skew towards that food, or you skew away from certain foods. Like for me, I love pizza, but every time I eat pizza, I feel like crap the next day. Maybe I'm bloated. My stools aren't the best. I have some indigestion. Like maybe I'm lactose intolerant. I'm not even sure, but I love the way it tastes. But then the next day, I always regret that decision. You know what I mean? Not just because of the scale, but just I physically feel terrible. So now I have some kind of aversion to pizza sometimes, where we'll order it and I'm like, I just know this is not going to make me feel good. And sometimes it's worth it, and sometimes it's not. And I skew away from that. I'd rather have something else.
That's good. Very good point.
So kind of in closing here, guys, the overarching ideas that we want you to take away is the first thing you need to do, the first thing you need to understand really to lose weight long term is to be in a caloric deficit or to be in an energy deficit, more like, let's just speak broadly. And calories are a great way to measure that and kind of help guide you on your journey. So you want to figure out around what you're roughly burning a day. Tinker with the different estimates. We've shown you one. There are several out there. Go ahead and explore them for yourself. And just for a week, track what you're eating. And you can use MyFitnessPal. You can use the Carbon Coach app, which we like to use. That is a subscription based app. So you do have to pay a fee every month. There are some added bonuses to that app as opposed to other ones that we like. So for us, it's worth it. But you kind of want to figure out where you're at and then slowly get yourself into a deficit. You should start to see weight come off if you're consistent with it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. That's a big part of the series. We want to inform you on the concepts that lead to weight loss and being successful with your goals. And hopefully we can get you some good information to help you with that. So,
and the last thing is, if you're not losing weight, typically you are either overeating or you've overestimated your expenditure, which just means you're overeating, right?
Yeah. Calories in, calories out. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. A lot of people really hate that phrase, but it is that simple. Every study that they've done on different macronutrient splits, and we can get into this in a future episode, but every study they've ever done on different like macronutrient profiles, when it's all equated for calories, they've found there's very little difference in like total weight loss. So we'll just leave it there. But anyway, guys, that is it for this episode. We really had fun filming this one. So give us a like, give us a share, give us a subscribe. That would be awesome. We're getting more viewers every single video, which is great. And hopefully you guys can check out our next episode. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Just a quick thing to throw out there too. If you guys want to hear about something particular, or you guys have questions, stuff like that, comment on the videos. And then that way we can look at them, create some action plans to go over those topics that you guys want to hear. All three of you guys, just kidding, we're actually getting more viewership. So
it's not just our moms anymore.
Exactly. So we're getting
it's our mom and our dad.
But we appreciate you guys who are listening and watching all these videos. I feel like we're getting better every one. We're getting more confidence with it. So thanks for coming along with the journey. And just give us some input would be helpful. So
feedback is always appreciated as well. So,
yep.
And we'll close the show like we always will. Just remember, no excuses
and no regrets. Thanks for watching.
Bye.